Welcome back to the Ripewave audio community. My name is John, and for this video we are bringing out the antiques, the Sony PSX700 and the X600, both from the early 80s. And the reason why we are is because when we attended the AV Summit last fall, we won. We had a great feeling. We won a Parasound. Now, of course, anything that's with the brand Parasound gets our attention because they built some quality things. This is their Zphono XRM Phono Preamplifier and sits in the middle of their Phono Preamp model range. And we're going to check this out and see if we can bring new life to these turntables that are running vintage cartridges. We've got a couple of moving magnet coils. The Sony V15 Type 5 cartridge is on this one. We have a Phillips 401 on this, but we also have another another Shure V15 Type 5 cartridge that we can mount on this. And we have a moving coil cartridge that came with this turntable, which is the Sony Sony XL44L. And we haven't been able to run that on our Sony preamp because that's only moving magnet. We did buy recently a Hagerman Bugle3, which has been excellent, and we have been able to use the moving coil cartridge with that. That Hagerman sells for $200, but the Parasound Zphono XRM lists for just under $600, and I think you can get it for just about $500. So let's unbox this thing. Let's take our first look at it and see what we got. Now, their upper end from Parasound, they have the John Curl design models, and but this is a mid-tier unit. Very excited. Now, I got this in November, shipped to me. They got this out to me quick after winning on that AV Summit. And I've been setting this aside so I could do this video right, because we were doing our whole AV receiver, AV processor series, and we wanted to finish up that first. Now, with that concluded, those 8K model receivers concluded, I can get into this and bring, I picked up the 600. This one doesn't sit here. This is at my parents' house normally. This is the phonograph. Now, it's not the first turntable that I utilized as a child growing up, but it's the one I use the most, and so this one's dear to me. Hopefully it still works, but we have this one I got online and shipped to me as a used model, and this is the grade up, the 700. So this will be exciting to do it this way. Of course, we've got the manual that comes with this. I've already took a peek at the manual online. There isn't a lot to setting this up, but you need to know what the settings or recommended settings are for your cartridges that you plan to use. Now, one nice thing to see, it does come with a removable power cord. That's always nice, and it makes it easier to do your configurations and then plug in the power cord later. Got some nice foam mounting in this, and here it is. Take it out of its plastic wrap here. Now you can see this is not as wide as other models that Parasound has, and you know, comparing it to the very simplistic Bugle3 phono stage from Hagerman Labs, you know, there's some obvious differences. You know, the Hagerman doesn't have the removable power supply, and this one does. I'm going to turn it around so you can see this. And obviously it has another couple of features here is you have separate inputs for moving coil versus moving magnet. that means you could actually have both of those simultaneously wired up. When you're on the moving coil, you have your selector for what the load impedance is going to be. You get the choice of how much gain you want to have. So if you have one of these cartridges that is putting out less than, I think it's a half a volt, then you want to bump that up. But yeah, having the balanced outputs is going to be nice. It's going to give you twice the voltage output as well on that. So that's the Parasound. And so part of this, I'm going to do part 2 of this video where we'll get into the more of the details of what the Parasound is. And then, I don't know, we'll probably cut this video and go to a second part where we actually start to do some comparisons between what our receiver is able to do. And keep in mind that a receiver or a processor, they often have a phono stage built in, but it's not at the same quality as a separate. And I think for a small investment, you can step up from what's built into your receiver or your processor, and then there's different grades up from there. Of course, we don't know. We're learning as we go here. As you go up the chain on phono stages, am I going to have a noticeable difference between, for example, the $200 Hagerman and the $600 Parasound? So that's what we're going to find out. So stay tuned. Let's take a step back and explain why you need a phono preamplifier. Well, the signals that are coming out of your turntable are very low voltage. These are a magnet and coil interacting with each other just from the grooves on the record, and it's putting out a very low voltage, and that can vary depending on the cartridge that you have. Some can even be under a half a volt, millivolt, and so they're very low signals, and so not enough for a normal preamplifier input to take. This is why you need a phono preamp to take it up to that next level, and also adjust for the curves that they do on these. And that's a topic for another day. But yes, they have to be brought up. And so the cable lengths themselves are really important. And as you notice, on the backs of these record players, the cables are not detachable on these models. And it was very common in those days. And they're set lengths. And you say, well, gosh, I may want to mount this longer than 3.5 feet from the processor and the receiver. So even if your processor receiver has a built-in phono preamp for moving magnet, in most cases, it may not be a long enough distance. Furthermore, as you go read through the Parasound manual, and I did, in fact, the first line in here says, please read the full instructions before turning this on. We do it as RipeWave because we want to be able to convey to you the best guidance around all this. But these cables have capacitance, and the more capacitance that gets added in to the equation, it affects the signal outcome. And you'll notice it here. If you look at some of the specifications, they want 250 picofarads or whatever for the lengths. So these cables on here are on here for a reason. It's got a known capacitance to that. It's factored in. And so you don't want to be extending the length of these cables without first going through a preamplifier of some sort. And if you read the manual even further, it says don't have the wires pass by any electrical outlets, line conditioners, or amplifiers. Now, if you have something in a rack, that's really hard to do to keep those distances out. So I see a great advantage of not having the preamplifier built into your processor or receiver. Yes, it's nice and convenient, but it's also very hard not to have these cables run by amplifiers and power cables within your rack in the process. By having an external preamplifier, you can keep the cables at the recommended length or the prefabricated lengths, plug it into the preamplifier, and then run out from the preamp any length that you need to. And the fact that this particular model has balanced outputs lets you even go further with confidence from the record player. And I'm actually considering moving my record players to the back of the room, putting the Parasound at the back, and then run balance cables to the front of the room where all the amplification is, just to keep it clean, keep the rumble away from it. I don't want it near my main towers. I mistakenly had these towers near the record player once, and the sub-passive radiator coming out of it was enough to rumble the turntable. So these things you have to think about when you're setting up your turntables. The next thing that you want to pay attention to is the type of cartridge that you want to use, moving magnet or moving coil. The nice thing about this Zphono unit is it supports both. But you want to look at a deeper level than that. You want to look at, in particular, the load impedance that it's looking for. And you know, in the olden days, you'd get a booklet like this with your cartridge. Maybe you still do. This is with the Shure V15 Type 5, and it will actually tell you here what you need for things like tracking force and everything. So I wrote this down. One of the things you want to look at is what it's putting out for voltage. Now this puts a pretty high voltage for a cartridge. This is putting out 3.2 millivolts. And then the Phillips that we have currently mounted on the 600, that's putting out 1.2 millivolt. And the Sony moving coil cartridge, the XL44L, is putting out 0.3 millivolts. Now this makes sense that the moving coil is putting out less voltage than the moving magnet. Now, we're reading into the Parasound manual, it says if you drop below 0.5 millivolts, then they want you to set the gain to 60 dB. Otherwise, you can keep it at 50 dBs. It's really nice that Parasound has all these flexible settings. Adjust the gain. When you get to moving magnets, now they're all going to be, most likely they're all going to be 47 kilo ohm load impedance, regardless of the make and the model. That's what you typically find. But with a moving coil, you've got ranges of load impedance depending on the cartridge. And so what some people might even do is fool around with that if they want to tailor the sound a little bit to either brighten the highs or lower the highs or whatever. That can be done, but there's usually a manufacturer's recommended load impedance for the moving coil. And we know for the Sony XL44L, they want a range of 40 to 100 ohms there. So when you take a phono stage like this one, there's only certain combinations. There's no variable load impedance settings here. So I either set the dip switches on this to 0, 1, 2, or 1 plus 2, and that gives me a combination of load. Now if it's moving magnet, I set that to 0, and I'm going to get 47K and a 40 dB gain. I don't have any other choices for moving magnet. And that's similar to what you'd get on your processor. No choices on load and gain in most cases that you see there. But when it comes to moving coil, you really only have 3 other choices here. Load varying between 553 to 85 ohms, and then the gain is adjusted between 50 and 64 dB. But one size fits all, versus on the back of the Parasound, we've got this variable load impedance selector, and then I can set between 50 and 60 dBs on the switch So a lot more flexibility on how you set this up for the characteristics of your cartridge there. So really important to figure that out as well. So on the moving magnet, you've got a choice of 40 or 50 dBs on the gain, and you want to set it to 40 normally. But if your cartridge is putting out less, you want to set it to the upper range. You want to give that a little more boost to the 50 dB setting. And then, likewise, you on the lower voltage moving coil, you would want to use the higher setting there as well. If we look into the front of this, you've got your power switch here. And then the next selection here is your mode, mono or stereo. Now, certainly if you listening to a mono recording, of mono LP, you want to put that in the mono setting. In some cases where you have some worn stereo records, setting it to mono can be take out some of the artifacts, and you could listen to that with a little more enjoyment in some cases. So there is some reasons to set it to mono on a stereo record. And here is your switch between moving magnet and moving coil. Now the manual says you can actually wire up both simultaneously. So here I have two turntables, and we're going to try this. I can have this turntable, for example, set up for moving coil with the Sony cartridge, and then here set up for moving magnet with either the Phillips or the Shure cartridge, and use this switch on the front to switch between the two. So I've almost got two channels. Now what they say about the ground, because there's only one ground post here, if you're using two turntables, wire both of the grounds to the back of the Parasound. Okay, they say there is some circumstances where if you're getting some hum, they may you may wire directly to the preamp, but in most cases you're wiring both of them right to the back of here. So that is exactly what we're going to do on that setup, and yeah, that gives you some guidance here. We'll be back with some more instruction, so stay tuned. At this point, we have both turntables wired into the Parasound, and I did some basic listening. I had the moving coil on one and a moving magnet on this one, and I was able to switch back and forth, and it was very slick. By moving the switch on the front, you go between MM and MC, moving magnet and moving coil. And when you do throw the switch, it does take a few seconds for it to switch over. It's not an instant switch, but maybe 3 seconds later, and then it's on to the other. Now, I did notice some difference in levels. So for fair comparison, as we start to really understand the differences here between, let's say, the Parasound and the Hagerman, I want to level match as much as possible. And first of all, I want to start with the same phono cartridge to be as equal as possible. These are both Shure V15 Type 5 cartridges with a micro ridge needle stylus on there. And there's a difference in these two turntables. Ideally, would have the same turntable. The 600 has a straight tone arm versus the 700 has a curved tone arm. And to make up for the differences, the head shell for each are different. So this one here on my right is for the 600 because it has the angle on there, and the 700 is straight. So the 700 has the bend in the tone arm versus the 600 does the bend right on the head shell. And this is the one that came with the unit. I'm looking for another original head shell for the 700. This is the original head shell, but this is going to do me going forward here. And they're interchangeable. We could do that, but you don't want to put the wrong head shell on the wrong unit. So we'll quickly mount these on. And as we change these out, we're going to make sure we have the right stylus tracking force on these. These just slide in. I'm going to put the lock on the tone arm so it doesn't move around. And then you just screw that in until it's done. Release the lock because you don't want to use these automatic turntables with the lock on. The other one on here, so I unlocked it. The next thing I'll do is these V15s have a dampening brush on them. I am going to lock those. I'm going to lock those in the up position for now. With them in the up position, you need to set a anti-stylus skating force of 1 gram. This one is just a manual wheel. This one actually has a digital readout. And I'm going to set this to 1 gram. So they're using the same stylus force on each. That's the nice thing about these Biotracer tone arms is I can dial these in really easy versus fooling around with weights on the tone arm as I change stylus. So it's really quick to change the stylus on them. But now that we have a like stylus on these, now the only difference now is the number of hours on the stylus itself. I know one of them has a brand new stylus and the other one has an unknown age to it. So that could be a difference there. But I could swap the stylus off mid-test. And so to do the level testing, I did set up a UMIC microphone and our REW software. So we can get these at the same level. For this calibration, it helps to have a test record. No, not that test record. That's not going to do us any good in this situation. But something like this, this is the Shure V15 Type 5 test record that came with the cartridge originally. And it does have test tones on there. So if I play the test tone, I can measure out of the speakers on this turntable, then this turntable, and match them. And even when we go to listen to different stylus, match those levels as well. And then we're not biasing the preference on one versus other, just simply on the volume. We want to be listening for the exact, how do the highs, mids, and lows sound. So this is called the Shure Trackability Test Record and is to be played at 45 RPM. Trackability test levels. Then there's a resonance test. I'm going to try track 3 on here. Now, as I switched off the moving coil to the moving magnet, I do have to take care in switching the output from this turntable over to the moving magnet side here. This is still going to be 40 dB gain. We're going to set this to moving coil and then turn it on. Manual for Parasound says make sure everything is turned off before making the switches. And let's give this a whirl. Now what I love about these fully automatic turntables is you can really dial in where you want it to start.
Trackability tests, level 1. Level 2.
So the first tone went up to about 70 dB. The second tone is going up to about 73.
Level 3.
That went up to 75.
Level 4.
Now let's try it with the other turntable. So we went from 70, 73, 74, 75, 76, kept moving up with that. Let's see if we get the same levels with this one. Power down. This needs to be turned up. So I've set it up for this one to go, and again, it's fully automatic here, so I can just push the down.
Trackability tests. Level 1.
That's matching about 70.
Level 2.
That's about 73, so this is matching.
Level 3.
All right, we ran through the test record on both record players, both with the same cartridge, both set to moving magnet with the same gain. And what we found is these are just so similar enough, there's only a slight difference. I would say 1 to 2/10 of a decibel. The 600 seemed to be a little lower on occasion versus the 700, but just about equal. So I don't think we needed to adjust between actually turntables. There's nothing much to really account for there. So now what I'd like to do is do the same test, but have one turntable run through the Hagerman. So we'll switch this over again. We'll power down. Now here's where the Hagerman I don't like as well. On the back of the Parasound, there on the binding post is a much nicer binding post for the ground. There's a hole in there I can put the wire straight through and then just tighten up on that. This one is just a screw and a bolt here, and you just got to wrap it around the, make a little curve, wrap it around there to get the ground strap on. Now on the Hagerman, I'll unplug this. There's no power switch, by the way. You just unplug the wall wart. And I leave the screws off of it. There's 4 screws on here. This is the settings on here. So this is moving magnet. So it should be on setting 0. None of the switches. This is set to 40 decibels. So we're expecting the same output. And on here, there are dip switches. And there's a dip switch for the right channel and the left channel. These are too small for me to see. And these are in opposing directions. So the right channel, the switches are going this way to go on, so those are shut off. And the left channel, they're going this way, so they're in opposing direction on the mount. And there's actually three sets of dip switches, and they're all set to the same configuration of the default 47K for moving magnets. So there's nothing for me to do there for this except for put the cover back on. Here, and power up the Hagerman. Certainly not as nice of an experience there to get that. If you're switching off cartridges and stuff, I don't like this this setup. But if you're going to be sticking with one cartridge, this can be fine. Power back on our amplifiers, our turntables, and we're going to be starting with this one. We just need to do actually one because we've already proved the turntables are right. So we're going to run the same test tones this time through the Hagerman. And remember to set these to 45 because this always resets to 33 every time you turn it on.
Trackability tests, level 1. Level 6.
That was about a decibel higher. So the Hagerman was about a decibel higher than the Parasound on each one of those tones. So what I want to make sure is when I'm listening to this, how do I adjust that to different volumes for that? You know, obviously a dip switch of plus 20, another 10 decibels on here is not going to help me going from 40 to 50 because I only want to move it one. So I'm going to have to dial back, and what I'll have to do is record the numbers in which it lowers it down. So let me look at the attenuator on the processor. So if this is set to 42, and that was a number high, I'm going to attenuate this one to 43.
Level 6.
I'd say that's about even now. So when I'm running through the Hagerman, I'm going to want to listen for it that way. And now it's going to be some listening tests to see what we do from there. Now I'm going to put a record on that I'm well familiar with, not necessarily because it's an ultra dynamic record or it's exceptionally well recorded, although this one's not bad. This is Captain Fantastic, and I just know it well, so let's start with that. I'm halfway through my listening test. Well, I don't really know when I'm going to end here, but I keep going back and forth between the Hagerman and the Parasound preamplifiers, and I've given an unfair advantage to the Hagerman because it's on the better turntable. But despite that, I'm feeling like the Parasound has a little more life. Now, this isn't really an obvious, immediate type of thing. I've had to go back and forth just to be fair, but I am consistently going back to the Parasound as having a little more life, a little more dynamics there than what I can hear on this. Now, looking at the spectrum analyzer, I'm using variable smoothing on this. We're not seeing any real differences on the measurements that are completely off. But it's the dynamics that maybe not come by on some of the frequencies that we're seeing there. As I get better with these tools, I might be able to train my eye to find those things a little bit better on the analyzer, but nothing glaring showing up on the analyzer as we do this. So I'm going to go through now and swap turntables and put the 600 on the Hagerman and the 700 on the Parasound, just to make sure. Now, I do know that the one advantage here is that I've got a newer stylus on here than this. Is that the difference in dynamics we're hearing? This will maybe help settle that. If we keep coming back to the Parasound, even with a swap, then we can rule out the stylus. So let's see how it goes. Interesting test. So we had just done that swap out between the two, and it seemed like it moved, right? So that the Hagerman actually sounded a little brighter, a little more lively after the switch. So then I got suspicious that it might be the stylus. There was a newer stylus on one turntable. So what I did is I swapped out the styluses. And the characteristic that I was keying in on moved with the stylus. Then I did using one turntable and one stylus, just move the wires rather than using two turntables back and forth. And I would characterize what I'm currently hearing now as the Parasound is a little more refined sound. The Hagerman is a little brighter, but they're very subtle differences. What I'm going to do now is try a different record for a different experience. Might bring out the Charlie Bird direct-to-disc that is usually my reference. So let's see what we can gather from trying different types of music, and to see if there's different musicality that we're hearing between the two preamps. This is the Charlie Bird direct-to-disc record. This, I don't know, I think it's around 1980. Very heavy. This is a 45. 1977, it says in the label. Shot. We've completed the Charlie Bird listening session. This is an excellent recording, by the way, Charlie Bird direct-to-disc. The second cut on the first side, Old Hymn, has got an amazing drum solo. And if you ever get a chance to listen to it, it is my favorite. It's very lifelike, and it's got such dynamics on this. Of course, it's all acoustic. He's got his guitar and everything. Super. Now we're going to just switch over something completely different, which is Donna Summer. But I'll give you and just to have something a little more on the disco side of it. And these are actually recorded pretty well for a disco record. But what the feedback on the Charlie Bird, I just still maintain that the Parasound is a little more refined, and the Hagerman has a little more brightness to it, but very subtle differences. It took me several back and forths. It's just not a real clear cut there. So let's switch over to this, and I'll give you the feedback on that. I'm still hearing the same characteristics with the disco record, and the last test I want to do is plug the phonographs directly to the processor. But to do that, I got to bring it closer. And look at how close I had to bring it to. There really isn't a lot of length on these cables. So if you want to use the built-in phono preamp in your processors, that has to be located pretty close to your processor. And you don't want to be extending the length of that wire, or it's going to adjust the sound. So we'll give this a try. We did the test on the Sony processor using its internal preamp. Not only could we audibly hear a difference between the Hagerman and the Parasound, which I were very close, and it was hard for me to do. This one was more obvious. We plugged in, and furthermore, the measurements that we were getting from REW is we were noticing particularly on the high end, it dropping off a little sooner and several dBs lower for those high-end frequencies. So you lost a lot on the high-end frequencies. We were running all tests through this processor, okay? So it was an equal test of the phono stage versus these external units. But I think you could also keep in mind that we have further research to do. We need to get in a preamp that has balanced inputs that can do 100% analog out to its output on that to really hear this in its way it's intended. When you have these processors, and if it doesn't have a bypass direct button, this one doesn't, it's running it through to digital. It's converting everything that's coming into it to digital and back to analog again. And those extra stages do impact the quality of the output. So if you want to be a purist on all of this stuff, you really want to have a setup that can pass through analog from the phono to the amplifier, the end amplifier there. And I know a lot of these preamps are now coming with USB ports, so you have a digital in there. There's an A to D converter within the phono stage, and we're even seeing phonographs now come with USB ports on the back of them. For me, that's a convenience item. I'm not sure that's the best thing to do. Your thoughts on that? So as we conclude, what would you prefer? The elegance of the Hagerman. You just plug it in, set it, and forget it. You hide it in your closet. Obviously you don't want to see something like this, but it does a very good job. For $200, it's very comparable to this $500-600 unit from Parasound, but is lacking a few features, right? So no balanced outputs, and I bet if we tested this out with balanced outputs, we might, in a proper preamplifier, we might notice a bigger difference there. Furthermore, just additional features like the rumble feature. Now, I didn't mention it, but when we turned the rumble feature, we couldn't hear the difference. That's good to have on there in case there's some vibrations in the room, those subsonic things that really take that energy away from your amplifier. That's recommended to always have on. The ability to quickly change the settings rather than opening up the case, changing dip switches, not really knowing if you got those dip switches correctly set. This is a lot more user-friendly. And as far as a package, this is something that you could display. It could sit on a rack. They do make rack mounts. They have in this smaller form factor, so 2 units could sit side by side. So this could sit next to a Parasound preamplifier or amplifier in a single U rack in your equipment rack. The other thing is, the power supply is obviously beefier on the Parasound. The internals on that look pretty clean. As you, of course, move up in the different Parasound models, they take that all to a higher level. But I think, for the level I'm at with my phonographic hobby, both of these suit it well. I just prefer to use the Parasound, and from a sonic point of view, they're both similar. But I think the Parasound has a lot more to offer as far as cosmetics, as far as being able to the usability. So how did you feel? Do you like the simplicity of the Hagerman, or would you rather move up to the Parasound and have that more tactile experience with the preamplifier? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. So please put in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this Ripewave audio community, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you can be notified the next time a video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.